Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kaylee and these are my books. Today I have a pretty big unhaul. As you saw from my first video on this channel, I had a pretty big haul, so with any big haul comes an unhaul. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. There's very limited book space in here, so if I bring books in, I gotta take books out. This haul is a little bit sad because I'm getting rid of some old favorites, but we gotta get rid of the old favorites to be able to store the new favorites. The first books I have for this unhaul are the Shadow and Bone trilogy, as well as the King of Scars book. I loved the Grishaverse about 5 years ago, and I still enjoy it now. It's just, if I was going to reread a favorite fantasy series, it wouldn't be the Grishaverse anymore. It used to be. I've read the Shadow and Bone trilogy probably 4 or 5 times. I love rereading favorite fantasy series over and over again, but now those would probably be, Mistborn or Nevernight or the Bear and the Nightingale series, and not so much Shadow and Bone trilogy anymore. And then just along with that, the King of Scars. I am keeping the Six of Crows duology because I can't yet get rid of that, but I still don't know if I would reread those books anymore. We'll see, but for now, these are the ones I've decided to get rid of. I am also unhauling Legendborn. This is a fantastic first book in a fantasy series. It's YA. It's a very unique take on the Merlin, King Arthur type of mythology. And it also has a lot of important social commentary in this novel, as well as characters dealing with grief. This book I really enjoyed, however, I'm just no longer interested in continuing on with the series because there's other things that are catching my attention. Nothing wrong with this book. In fact, I do recommend it if you're into YA fantasy, but for now I just want my energies to go more towards adult fantasy. And I would have to reread this book before reading the sequel, and I just don't really feel like rereading this book, and therefore I'm unhauling it. The next book I'm getting rid of is Ariadne. This book is a Greek mythology retelling about Ariadne and Dionysus' story. It is pretty interesting. I don't know, I didn't love this book because it just was so depressing. It was like bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happened. There wasn't a lot of room to breathe, and I don't like books that are just solely depressing. It's okay if it's overall depressing, but I need some more wins in a book, and this book didn't have a lot of wins inside of it, so therefore I'm getting rid of it. The next book I'm getting rid of is A Rogue of One's Own by Evie Dunmore. This is the second book, with the first book being Bringing Down the Duke. I did really enjoy the first book. I gave the first book either 4 or 5 stars, but this book just didn't hold my attention as much. I found myself skimming through it, and I have kept it because I do like the first book and therefore felt some loyalty to the second book. This book stood out to me as a weaker book on my shelf, and therefore I just want to unhaul it. I am also unhauling The Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. This is a YA fantasy story about the city divided between monsters and humans, and it is unique in that it's YA fantasy without romance in it, which is unique for YA fantasy. I do love romance in my fantasy, however, I like fantasy without romance too, so it's nice to see the YA genre having a bit of both. This book, I did really like it at the time, but I don't remember a ton from it. I remember not liking the second book as much, and I don't think I'm ever going to want to revisit this series, so therefore I'm unhauling it. The next book I'm unhauling is Ace of Spades. This is a YA mystery / thriller, and I think it's pitched as Get Out meets Gossip Girl, so very interesting premise, and it was very fun to read. I just don't see myself rereading this book anytime soon, and therefore instead of it just sitting on my shelves, I want to spread the love with this book and give it to someone who hasn't read it yet. The next book I'm unhauling is Lore. This is a book that is a very unique take on Greek mythology. It's Greek mythology meets urban fantasy, and basically there's a tournament every so often, and the Greek gods can be killed, and then you absorb the Greek gods' power. So every so often the Greek gods are vulnerable to humans killing them, and humans would want to kill these gods so that they can absorb the power. And once they absorb the power, they become the new Aphrodite or Zeus or Poseidon or whatever god they've killed. I did enjoy this novel quite a bit. I think I gave it 4 stars. I just don't see myself ever wanting to reread it, and therefore I want to pass it along. The next book I have is A Curious Beginning. This is the first book in a longer mystery series. And this was pitched to me as slow burn romance meets murder mystery in the Victorian era, and all of those sounded so fantastic. I was incredibly excited for this book, so imagine my surprise when this was just a low 3-star rating for me. I just didn't feel like I connected with these characters, and I felt like things were happening to the characters more than the characters were actively doing things. And for that reason, I want to unhaul this book, and I will not be continuing on in the series. The next book I have is Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love Silvia Moreno Garcia. Mexican Gothic, Gods of Jade and Shadow, and The Beautiful Ones all got 4 or 5 stars from me, and her writing is so nice to just sink into, and her stories all are incredibly unique too. I feel like each story I read from her, she writes a new genre each time, and her stories are never predictable because they don't fall back on familiar tropes. However, this book just wasn't for me. It was very, very slow, and it's meant to be slow. It's meant to be incredibly atmospheric, so it's not like she didn't warn us going into this book. However, I thought that the end climax would be worth the slow buildup, but the end climax was anticlimactic for me. And for this reason, I gave the book 2 stars, and I just want to get it off my shelves. And the last book I have to unhaul in this video is Wings of Ebony. This is a YA fantasy. It's an urban fantasy where a teenage girl's mother dies and her biological father enrolls her in a magic school. However, the magic school has very strict rules that she is not allowed to contact the non-magic people, but the community where she grew up along with her half-sister need her help. She grapples with the rules of the magic school and the need of her home community. This book is a wonderful YA fantasy. It deals with a lot of issues that our world deals with, hence it being an urban fantasy. This book shows the power of community. There is nothing wrong with this book. In fact, I recommend this book to YA fantasy readers. It just no longer has a place on my bookshelves because I'm no longer that interested in YA fantasy, and therefore I want to pass it along so that other people can love this book. So most of the books in this unhaul were simply books that I just don't see myself rereading, and they weren't books I hated, they weren't books I loved, just good books that I want to see other people read. However, there were some painful books that I got rid of, such as the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I loved those books so much. It's just, I think that era of my reading has passed and I'm moving on to new series instead. But it does hurt that those won't be on my shelves anymore. I keep going back and forth on whether or not I'm going to get rid of them. The books that were the easiest to get rid of were definitely Ariadne and Velvet Was the Night, because Ariadne just depressed me and the Velvet Was the Night just bored me. So those books were easy to get off my shelves. No shade to the authors though, especially Silvia Moreno Garcia. She's wonderful. Velvet Was the Night was just not for me. But anyways, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.